What began as an ordinary Wednesday evening quickly turned into something unexpected. I came back from work feeling the usual exhaustion, ready to unwind with my wife, Lisa. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, it was obvious that something wasn't right. Lisa sat on the couch, her hands folded neatly on her lap, with a manila envelope placed carefully beside her. Her tone was emotionless as she said, "We need to talk." I sat down across from her, already sensing that something serious was coming. "What's going on?" I asked. Without another word, she slid the envelope across the coffee table toward me. Inside were divorce papers. No lead-up, no explanation. Just straight to the point. Her declaration hit me hard, but not in the way most would expect. The truth is, our relationship had quietly unraveled a long time ago. Lisa had ceased to be a partner and had instead turned into a hypercritical roommate. Kindness had long left her home. I'd always had a nagging suspicion she was seeing someone else, although I never managed to prove it. Still, as I stared at those documents, the feeling that washed over me wasn't sorrow or rage, it was a strange, quiet sense of relief. "All right," I replied calmly. Her eyes widened. "All right," she repeated, surprised. "Yeah," I said with a shrug. "If that's what you want." Lisa's expression tightened. It was clear she had anticipated a different response, maybe begging, anger, or an attempt to win her back. Instead, I leaned into the couch cushions and exhaled, a weight lifting off my chest for the first time in years. She pressed her lips into a tight line. "Well, I guess that was easier than I imagined." Without another word, she stood, grabbed her purse, and moved toward the door. That's when I noticed how done up she was, her hair perfectly styled, makeup on point, and wearing a dress I hadn't seen her put on in ages. "Going out?" I asked with a half-smile. She paused briefly before rolling her eyes. "Not that it's any of your concern, but yes." And I laughed genuinely. There was something oddly comical about the whole thing. She clearly thought she was delivering some grand final blow, imagining herself as the prize I was supposed to be devastated to lose. But I wasn't. "Have a good time," I said, making my way to the kitchen. "No need to wait up." She huffed as she left, but I could sense her unease. I wasn't behaving how she expected. And that was only the beginning of her confusion. In the days that followed, Lisa behaved as though she'd emerged victorious. She barely came home, likely staying with the man she'd left me for. I didn't care. My world had brightened overnight. I hit the gym, started eating clean, and reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. The stress that had clung to me for so long vanished. Then something started to shift. It began with little things. Lisa would come by the house and seem off. She looked around the space like something was missing, as if she expected a mess or some visible sign of my emotional collapse. But everything was neat and orderly. I was composed, thriving even. There were no remnants of her belongings. And then I saw it, doubt creeping into her eyes for the first time. She had convinced herself she was trading up, believing she'd leave me wallowing in regret while she found happiness elsewhere. But things rarely go according to plan. What happens when your safety net doesn't catch you the way you thought it would? In those initial days after the announcement, Lisa stayed away and I didn't hear much from her. Her absence didn't bother me. In fact, I was doing better than I had in years. I no longer had to tiptoe around her moods or fake conversations with someone who had emotionally checked out long ago. I finally had the space to focus on myself. I started each day with a workout and cooked real meals at night: steak, roasted vegetables, salmon, things Lisa used to complain about but never helped prepare. I slept deeply for the first time in what felt like forever. It became clear how much of a burden I had been carrying without realizing it. But Lisa's behavior began to change. At first, it was small. She would return to grab something but linger longer than expected. One evening, she walked into the kitchen while I was eating dinner and just stood there, observing me before speaking. "You're cooking?" she asked, almost sounding taken aback. I glanced at my plate, then looked up at her. "Yeah," she scoffed, shaking her head. "Since when?" "You've always hated cooking." I gave a faint smile. I didn't hate cooking. I hated doing it while being criticized constantly by someone who made me feel like I could never get anything right. Her body tensed and I could see a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She wasn't used to hearing me speak like that. But there was no reason for me to hold back anymore. She had made her choice. "Whatever," she muttered, grabbing her things before leaving once more. But I noticed something was bothering her. I didn't react the way she expected. There were no emotional outbursts, no desperate phone calls or texts begging for a second chance. I didn't sit around sulking or drowning myself in alcohol. In her mind, she would be the one moving on while I was supposed to be heartbroken. But instead, I was doing better than ever, and that unsettled her. It was the beginning of her regrets. After a week, things started to get even more unusual. One evening, out of the blue, she gave me a call. Her voice was casual, as if she hadn't just walked away from our marriage. "Hey," she said lightly. "Just checking in. Have you been?" I almost laughed at the absurdity. Since when did she care to check on me? "I'm good," I replied. "Actually, I'm doing great." That response was met with silence, an uncomfortable stretch of it. Then she cleared her throat. "Oh. Well, that's good," she said, sounding less than thrilled. It was clear she had been hoping for a different answer. I decided to turn the question back on her. "And you? How's everything going?" There was a pause. "Yeah, things are okay," she said, but her tone gave her away. She wasn't being honest. I didn't push for more, but I had a strong suspicion she was still with the guy she had likely left me for. But maybe the fantasy was wearing off. Maybe he wasn't all she'd imagined. Maybe the reality of being single in your mid-30s wasn't quite as glamorous as social media made it seem. Honestly, it didn't matter to me anymore. "Glad to hear it," I said. "Anyway, I've got plans, so I need to head out." That part wasn't true. I didn't have anything scheduled. I just wanted to cut the call before she started digging for more. She hesitated as if she had more to say, but settled for a reluctant, "Oh. Okay. Talk later." Talk later? That wasn't going to happen. That moment marked the first real cracks in her dream life. And over the next few days, her behavior only confirmed it. Lisa started popping in at the house more frequently. At first, she claimed she was just picking up random items she'd forgotten. But soon, she began lingering. One evening, close to 10, she came by saying she needed a pair of shoes, but instead of leaving right after, she made herself comfortable on the couch, watching me closely like she was waiting for something. I didn't give her anything. Another time, she walked in during a call with one of my friends and stayed nearby, clearly trying to overhear the conversation. I made a point of laughing and talking about how much better I felt lately. She didn't like that one bit. With each step I took toward confidence, she looked more and more unsettled. Regret was written all over her face, though she refused to admit it. Her pride stood in the way of any confession. That's when it dawned on me she believed she still had control. She thought she could walk away, explore her freedom, and have the option to return whenever she pleased. But she was completely mistaken. For years, Lisa held the reins. She knew how to spin every situation to her benefit, always ensuring it seemed like she was the one calling the shots. I played along for the sake of peace, constantly adjusting to her moods and treading lightly. But now, with nothing left to lose, I stopped following her script, and that's when she started to unravel. Her visits became more frequent, each time under flimsy pretexts. Once it was mail she forgot, another time it was her favorite shampoo. But her real reason was obvious. She wasn't visiting to collect things, she was coming to evaluate me, to see how I was coping without her. And the answer was, exceptionally well. I made sure everything looked perfect. The house was spotless, something she never believed I could manage alone. The refrigerator was filled with fresh groceries. A gym bag sat by the front door, showing I was taking care of myself. I even placed a book on self-development on the coffee table, something she would have never expected me to read. Every detail, every subtle change was a quiet message. I was doing just fine on my own. And it was driving her mad. One night, she showed up while I was watching television. She stood silently in the doorway, arms crossed, staring like I had done something wrong. Without much interest, I asked, "What's up?" barely glancing away from the screen. She let out a heavy sigh. "Can we talk?" That was surprising. Lisa never asked to talk. She gave commands. She lectured. She controlled. I muted the TV and turned toward her. "Sure," I said. There was hesitation. And for the first time, I saw something unfamiliar in her expression, uncertainty. I don't understand," she finally said. I raised an eyebrow. "Don't understand what?" She gestured vaguely in my direction. "This. You're acting like you're completely unaffected. Like none of this bothers you." I shrugged. "That's because it doesn't." Her lips tightened into a thin line. She was waiting for something to break in me. A sign of pain. A flicker of the heartbreak she had imagined. There were no hidden signs of inner turmoil. Truthfully, I was in the best place I had ever been emotionally. When she softly commented, almost surprised, that I didn't even seem upset, I couldn't help but chuckle. A genuine laugh. "Lisa, why would I be sad? You asked for the divorce. You got what you wanted. What's there for me to be miserable about?" I replied without a hint of sarcasm. Her expression changed in that moment. I caught a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even fear. This outcome wasn't part of her plan. She had imagined a scene where I would plead with her to come back, where she would have all the control. But that narrative had unraveled. Instead of a broken man, she was facing someone calm, content, maybe even thriving. And I think for the first time, it hit her that she might have made the wrong call. As the illusions started breaking down, reality was setting in for her. Lisa was far from naive. She understood what she had done. Leaving was a calculated risk. She thought she was trading up, believing her new partner would fill some kind of void, offer a spark she claimed was missing. But I could already sense things weren't going smoothly. The facade was slipping. One night, the truth cracked through. She said, "You don't even care that I'm moving on." And I noticed it immediately. I'm moving on. Not I moved on. The present tense said everything. It meant her new life wasn't going as seamlessly as she had hoped. I leaned into the couch, half smiling. "Lisa, your life choices aren't my concern anymore." She recoiled, literally flinched at my words. That single moment held a shift in dynamic. I finally had control. And I wasn't about to give it up. It became increasingly clear that her dream life was falling apart. At first, it showed in subtle ways. She started visiting more frequently, staying longer each time, asking questions that didn't really concern her. But soon, the signs grew more obvious. She began creating reasons to linger. One evening, she showed up claiming she needed some forgotten work document. I didn't press her. I simply let her search through her old desk, but instead of retrieving it and leaving, she just stood there, flipping through irrelevant papers, clearly stalling. I could feel her eyes on me, yet I gave her no attention. Then came a visit that shattered any pretense. It was close to 11 at night when she knocked. Even I was surprised she had the nerve to show up so late. I opened the door, leaning casually against the frame. "Something wrong?" I asked. She hesitated, letting out a dramatic sigh. "Can I come in?" I didn't need to ask what was going on. I already knew. Her carefully constructed fantasy had collapsed. I stepped aside without a word, watched her settle onto the couch like she still belonged there. I took a seat across from her, waiting patiently. It didn't take long before she broke the silence. "So, you're really okay with all of this?" Her voice was softer, almost tentative. I gave a nonchalant shrug. "Why wouldn't I be?" She shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't about curiosity, it was a test. She wanted to see if she still held any sway over me. But I wasn't playing that game. Eventually, she tried to ease into the question she really wanted to ask. "So, are you seeing anyone?" There it was. Classic. I almost laughed again. Not because it was amusing, but because it was so predictable. She was spiraling, desperate to know if I had moved on first. I leaned back with a grin. "Why do you ask?" She blinked, a little flustered. "Just wondering, I guess." Wondering? No. She was hoping. She needed to know if there was a chance I was still emotionally available, just in case her own rebound was falling apart. I didn't press her for details, there was no need. Lisa had never been one to keep emotions buried. The silence hung for a few minutes before she finally blurted it out. I'm not sure I made the right decision." I kept my face unreadable, though internally, I was beaming. "Oh," I replied, feigning surprise. She sighed heavily and ran a hand through her hair, clearly distressed. "I just thought things would turn out differently." That was her confession, so I gently prodded. "Different how?" She avoided eye contact, fidgeting slightly. "I guess I thought maybe I just needed something new, a clean slate, but it's not." She trailed off and stopped herself. She couldn't bring herself to say it aloud. She didn't want to admit that the man she left me for wasn't the dream she imagined, that her so-called upgrade wasn't an improvement at all, that the other side wasn't any greener. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of her words linger. Then I stood up and said plainly, "Well, Lisa, that's not really my concern anymore, is it?" She looked stunned. Her mouth opened, then closed again, speechless. This version of me was foreign to her. She was used to the man who bent over backward, who sacrificed for the sake of peace. That person no longer existed. She was just beginning to grasp that. For years, Lisa was convinced she had control, believing I'd always be there, waiting and hoping. She thought she could walk out, create a new beginning, and I'd be the one left broken. But life has a way of revealing the truth, and reality was proving much harsher than her illusions. After that evening, when she practically confessed her dissatisfaction with the new path she had chosen, I figured she'd retreat. Whether it was pride or plain embarrassment, I assumed she would stay away. But I was wrong. She began showing up more often, not just to gather her belongings, but for reasons she never made clear. One Friday night, not long after I'd returned from the gym and was still riding the high of a good workout, I heard a knock at the door. It was 9:45. A bit too late for friendly drop-ins. Before I even reached the door, I knew it had to be her. And when I opened it, there she stood, Lisa. She looked like she'd been through a storm. Her hair was wild, like she'd been tugging at it out of frustration, and her face was a storm of regret, confusion, and something that looked very much like panic. I leaned casually against the doorframe, arms crossed. She shifted her weight uneasily. "Can I come in?" she asked. Part of me wanted to refuse. But curiosity won out. She had never appeared like this before. This wasn't the self-assured, superior woman who once believed she was the prize. No, this was someone who realized too late that she'd lost the game she started. I moved aside, letting her pass. She stepped in without a word and didn't even bother to sit, just stood there looking lost. I didn't rush her. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to sit in the discomfort of her choices. Finally, she exhaled, sharp and heavy, and turned to me. "I need to talk to you," she said. I lifted a brow. "About?" She swallowed hard. "Everything." There was no more pretending. Whatever had happened in her new world had finally stripped away the arrogance she'd carried for so long. I nodded toward the couch. "Go ahead." She hesitated but eventually sat down, her hands tightly intertwined. "I thought leaving was the right move," she began. "Honestly, I believed I needed something new, something different." I said nothing, just kept watching her. She took a long breath before continuing. But I was wrong. That fragile layer finally cracked. I leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "What changed?" A humorless chuckle escaped her lips. "Do you really want to know?" I shrugged lightly. "Why not?" Then she unraveled. "I thought he was someone new. Someone who would treat me better." Her voice faltered as she lowered her gaze. But I was so naive. I thought he genuinely cared. Turns out I was just another option for him. That was it. I didn't say a thing, just let her talk. "In the beginning, he was exciting," she went on, her voice trembling. "He made me feel alive, like I was finally doing something spontaneous. But little by little, I began to see who he really was." She scoffed bitterly. "I wasn't unique. I was just another face in a crowd to him. And the second I tried to talk seriously about where we were headed, he shut it down. Told me he was never looking for anything permanent." I held back a smile. Lisa, the one who believed she was trading up, had been outplayed. Her hands balled into fists. And the worst part? When I realized it wasn't going to last, I looked around and saw I had nothing. No one. Then she glanced at me, desperation flickering in her eyes. "You moved on so quickly. It felt like I never even mattered to you." I couldn't help it. I laughed. A genuine laugh from deep in my chest. "Lisa," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You didn't." Her face drained of color. That was when the truth hit her. She had always thought she held some kind of power over me. That no matter what happened, a part of me would always want her back. But the reality was I had emotionally checked out long before she did. She just never saw it. She remained motionless, stunned by the truth settling around her like a heavy fog. The woman who once believed she had everything under control now looked completely unmoored. She wasn't steering the ship anymore. In fact, she never had. And the most devastating realization for her? She finally understood that. For the first time, there was no escape route. No hidden option. No safety net waiting in the wings. The man she left me for had thrown her away the moment she became inconvenient. And now here she was, hoping the person she cast aside might still be willing to pick up the shattered pieces. But I wasn't. She stared at the floor, hands gripping the edge of her sweater tightly. "I know I made a mess of everything," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve anything from you, not after what I did." I said nothing. Let the silence speak for itself. Let her sit in the ruins of her own making. Her eyes slowly lifted to meet mine, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something new in them, fear. Not fear of harm, but the deep, soul-shaking kind that comes from realizing you've made a mistake too big to fix. "I miss you," she murmured, voice breaking. "I miss what we had." I laughed again, a full, honest laugh that came from knowing I was finally free. "Lisa," I said, shaking my head slowly. "There's no we. Not anymore." She recoiled like she had been slapped. She hadn't expected finality. She thought there might still be a chance. But the panic in her eyes told me she finally saw it. This wasn't a game, and I wasn't playing. I was truly, undeniably done. She had no place left to go. The final desperate effort. She was clearly scrambling now, trying to find any possible way to undo the damage she had caused. And then, out of nowhere, she did something I hadn't expected. She reached out and took my hand. This was Lisa, the same woman who had spent years making me feel like I was in the way, the one who had walked out on me without a backward glance. And now she was holding my hand as if that simple gesture could mend all the broken pieces between us. I didn't jerk away. I just looked at her. "You don't have to forgive me," she murmured, voice barely audible. "But maybe we could try again? Maybe we could start over." I tilted my head, repeating her words in disbelief. "Start over?" She nodded eagerly, as if she'd just convinced herself that starting over was something we could actually do. "We were great together once, weren't we? Maybe if we just—" "No." That single word was enough to break whatever fragile hope she had managed to hold onto. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something else, but no sound came. She blinked rapidly, clearly struggling to comprehend the situation. I leaned in just slightly, wanting to make sure she couldn't mistake my words. "Lisa, I spent years feeling like I was never enough. Like everything I did was pointless. You left because you thought there was something better waiting out there. That was your choice." Her grip on my hand grew tighter, her throat working hard to swallow the emotion building. "I know. But—" I cut her off before she could say more. "You don't get to rewrite what happened. You can't just disappear, decide you made a mistake, and waltz back in like none of it mattered." Tears brimmed in her eyes. "But I love you." I gave a small, bitter smile. "No, you don't. What you miss is having someone who actually cared." And then I finally pulled my hand away. That was the moment she crumbled. Right there, in the living room where so many arguments had played out, the same room where she once held all the power, Lisa fell apart. She had always carried herself like she was untouchable, like she could walk away and the world would simply bend to her will. But not this time. Not with me. And I felt nothing. It wasn't my responsibility to pick up her pieces anymore, and I wasn't going to let her place them at my feet. She didn't leave immediately. She just sat still, her gaze fixed on the floor, her breathing uneven and shallow. Neither of us spoke for a long while. My words were still settling into her, and I could see her wrestling with a truth she didn't want to face. For so long, she believed she had ended things, that the divorce was on her terms. But now she was beginning to understand I had been the one to truly move on. And there was no undoing that. Eventually, she whispered, "I don't know what to do." And for once, it wasn't manipulation. It wasn't an act. It was real. Lisa had always been the kind of person who kept a backup plan in her back pocket, someone who could find an escape route no matter the mess. But this time was different. She had burned a bridge, believing she could always rebuild it. Now she stood there watching it collapse into ash. I sighed and leaned back on the couch, still watching her. "You should go." Her head jerked up. "What?" I motioned toward the front door. "Lisa, we've said everything that needs to be said. You made a choice. Now you have to live with it." Tears began to pool in her eyes again, but I didn't react. I had poured years into trying to make her happy, trying to be the partner she said she wanted. And in return, I got an empty marriage and a partner ready to abandon it all without hesitation. So no, I wasn't going to comfort her now. She rose slowly, her legs shaky beneath her. "So that's it? You're just done?" I gave her a tilted look and a faint, sorrowful smile. "Lisa, I was done the moment you walked out that door." Her expression crumbled. I had never seen her so completely lost. But I wasn't going to be the one to find her way for her. I got up and walked to the front door, opening it wide. "Goodbye, Lisa." She stood there for a second, frozen. Then she exhaled shakily and walked past me, stepping out into the night. On the porch, she paused for a heartbeat, as if she was tempted to turn around, thinking she still had a chance to change my mind. But then she looked into my face and saw nothing there. No hesitation, no flicker of doubt, and she knew. She had already lost. Without a word, she turned and walked away. I closed the door, locked it, and for the first time in many years, I felt something that had long eluded me. Complete and undeniable freedom. The silence that followed her exit felt different than before. It wasn't crushing or suffocating. It was serene. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the stillness, the absence of constant conflict, and that unrelenting sense of inadequacy. And for the first time in years, I smiled. A real smile. One that came from deep within, full of relief and release. Lisa was gone. This time for good. and I didn't feel a trace of sadness. Not even a little. The next few days felt like the beginning of a new chapter. There was no more questioning myself. No more waiting for the sound of the door and dreading what mood she might bring in with her. I was no longer playing a supporting role in my own life. I was finally free. I began focusing on myself in ways I never had before. The gym became more than just a distraction. It became the space where I began piecing myself back together. I began reaching out to friends I hadn't seen in ages and started embracing opportunities one had always avoided. I even treated myself to a solo weekend getaway, something Lisa would have found ridiculous in the past. But to my surprise, it turned out to be an unforgettable experience. Then, a few weeks later, an unexpected message popped up on my phone from a number I didn't recognize. It read, "I messed up. I wish I could take it all back. Lisa." Without a second thought, I erased the message, put my phone aside, and carried on with my day. Because, for the first time in what felt like forever, I had finally found happiness.